that's the part that's the right on the boxes. Yeah, because they were counted originally. So
Being maintained by the city.
I call the meeting to order and welcome everyone to the City of Kalispell's work session on September 23rd, 2024. One item for discussion this evening, which is lead service line replacement funding review. This is a follow-up on a prior discussion last month.
That's correct.
So Susie, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Your Honor and council members. We have discussed this topic at a previous work session. And if you recall, we're actually under the current lead and copper revised rule that we are under. And there's potentially a new rule coming before us. It's called the lead and copper improvement rule. So when we look at things, we're looking at these two rules in parallel. But as we reviewed it at the last one, we went through what the requirements were for both of those rules, the implementation actions that we have to take that are necessary, and then the funding portion, which is where we kind of took a time out. Council asked me to look at what it would cost for the city to fund, or excuse me, council asked me to look at the water fund to see if we took on the cost to replace the lead service lines, what that would mean for our water fund. And that's what I did. I'm happy to go through provide a little more background if council desires, or I can just jump right into the funding review portion of it.
Funding review.
Yeah,
Funding
right?
review.
Yeah.
Funding review. Okay. So really, there's two main funding options that we looked at last time. One was funding through the water rates, and that would be moving forward with an SRF loan where 60% of that would be forgiven, 40% of that would be debt, and that is at a 1.75 interest rate. The second option would be for city water customers to fund the construction cost, and we could institute a program to help them pay for that up front, and then they could have deferred payments, or the customer could pay at the time of construction, or the customer themselves could just manage and pay for the lead service line replacement if they so wish on their own. So again, we looked at what that would mean for the water fund. In order to really look at the water fund, what we do is we do projections. So we looked at the fund from fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 28. And let's see, we projected costs for maintenance and operation. We projected costs for capital improvements and then debt obligation. For debt, we included existing debt and our large capital projects such as the tower and the wells project, the new lower zone storage tank replacement, and then we looked at taking on this additional debt obligation for funding lead service lines. We always, after we do these projections, we look at our financial policies, which we've discussed several times with council. And really that's those 5 bullet items. We want to make sure that the fund is able to cover debt service ratios, which is the net revenues. It has to be 100%, 110% of the highest debt payment. So we checked that. We checked our bond reserves, whether we can make those bond reserves, which is that required restricted revenue. We checked to make sure our minimum operating reserves were funded at 90 days. So we did that for till fiscal year 28. We looked at our replacement fund, our equipment replacement fund items, and then our capital renewal and replacement projects funding at $2.5 million per year over that time frame. So after I looked at all that and did all the projections, we determined that all the policies could be met through fiscal year 28. And as a result, we would not need to increase the rates to take on the additional debt for the lead service line projects. And so that was your question that you asked. And as I looked at the fund is capable to handle the additional debt for that project.
For the 40%.
For the 40%, yep, we would take on 40% debt for that project. And I used, and for as an example, I used what we know right now, which would be, we were taking on, let's see, I used our I'm gonna point up here real quick. I used what we put in the fund for this year. We that we would potentially do a project for $3.6 million, where 60 of that is forgiven and 40% of that would be debt. So really, we would be working on debt for $1.4 million. And that's what I looked at as I did the projections.
How long does it take the 60% to be forgiven?
To 20, the 60% is forgiven right away at the time of the projects. Yes.
When it's done?
Yep.
And Susie, one of the issues, I kind of commented before, I've looked at it and said, it's your house, you're responsible. Right now, policy is when we find a lead pipe, historically, the city replaces that, correct?
If we are doing a construction project and we recognize a lead service line, then we would replace that lead service line from the main to the curb stop. We never went all the way to the house. But yes, if we did identify a lead service line, we would replace it to the curb stop.
To the curb stop.
Yep.
Okay.
And do we have an estimate as far as the cost to a homeowner for typical replacement and what that would be? I think it was an 8-year payment plan that we were looking at, what that cost would be to that individual household?
I didn't do the calculation, but depending, so there's a lot of different variables with what that cost would be. We ranged it between, I believe, like $5,000 to $17,000, depending on if you had to replace a driveway, a sidewalk, remove a tree, go underneath a porch. So there was kind of a range in there on that. So it was between like $5,000 and $17,000 is what we were using for estimates, which is pretty variable. Mm-hmm. And then we would just have a deferred payment, 8 years payment plan back. Yep. Mm-hmm. So divide that number.
Right. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
And this has to be done in the next 5 years?
So no, if EPA decides to adopt the LCRI rule, then this timeline is what we are looking at. All lead service lines need to be replaced by 2037.
Okay. And let's say, just devil's advocate, you get 3 people who it's $30,000 to do it. Mm-hmm. And they say, I don't have the money, I'm not doing it. what are the consequences to to us as the operator?
To us as the operator, EPA did have some qualifiers for service lines that were owned by the property owner and would not let us onto their property to complete the construction as a part of that. So there are conditions that we can fall under. We have to have, I think, 4 approaches to them that we have to check the box, that we tried to get a hold of them and talk them through letting us replace the lead service line, either whichever way we decide, whether we fund it or whether they have to fund it. But we have to, I think, approach them 4 different times through various methods. And then as that property changes hands, we have to do it again. So you're still on the hook for it eventually, but there's 4 qualifiers that you have to step through over a certain time frame.
And I think I asked this last time, but if they agree to let you on and they do the replacements, but then payment comes up, if we did the option where the household's paying, the payments come up, they opt for 8 years and payments come up, but, it gets tacked onto their bill, huh? So it's.
Would, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so if they don't pay it through their bill, then their water gets shut off.
We would, yeah, yep.
So if I have this right, the 1.45 million doesn't affect customer rates, but what in the event of an emergency? Does that use up all our reserves?
Nope, the fund was sustainable, so we were fine through 2028. We'd have to look again at the fund in 2028 to see if we make sure that we're meeting our debt obligations. But actually, a lot happens in the city in 3 years, so we would be looking at the fund anyway at that time. So, and we're going to do after we do a facility plan update, we're going to go through a rate and impact fee review because we're due to do an impact fee review here in this upcoming year also. So we will be looking at them anyway. But as I did these projections, we met our debt obligations when we would incur this debt through 2028 and probably in past 2028. Now, I will say that that's not taking on any additional debt besides what I used for the projections, which are the Tower and Wells project, which we're almost done with now. The lower zone reservoir also was included in there. We have to replace those 2 reservoirs, so that was in there. So if we had another unanticipated large project that we'd have to incur debt on, then we'd have to come back to the drawing board and look at the fund again. But for now, with just those, the fund is sustainable.
Thank you.
Questions, thoughts?
I guess I'm still where I was the previous time, which it seems to me that we have this very generous program where we have 60% forgiven and 40% at a good interest rate that we don't have to raise now. We know don't have to raise water rates to be able to cover, versus a situation where a household, due to no fault of their own, may have lead service lines, and they're forced with a decision of either not replacing them because they can't afford them and not allowing the city to access their property to do it, or replace them and have, if it's $17,000, pretty sizable payment on their water bill, again, for something they're not responsible for, likely. And they may be in very dire financial straits. We don't, some folks that won't be an issue. They'd be able to pay it, but there's plenty of people in our community who are struggling financially, and that'd be a significant increased cost. So for me, I would definitely go with the water fund rates with this generous loan program.
I understand everything you're saying, but isn't it true that everything from street side has always been the homeowner's responsibility?
In our rules and regulations, the entire service line is the customer's responsibility. So that's always the case. When we do find leaks that are on the street side, the city will go in and we will replace that portion of the service line from the curb stop to the main. It's just been a city practice that we've done since before I started at the city. It's just a practice that we've provided as a part of the water system. So, but no matter what, in our rules and regs, service lines are maintenance of the service lines are the responsibility of the homeowner or the customer.
Thank you.
Speak up.
I'm torn, because I get what both of you are saying. Are we opening something up where we start to take on that from the main to the
Mike.
house?
Like,
One of the things that the city manager and I talked about is if council were to take on the cost through the water fund, we thought it would be important to establish some type of a resolution identifying why it was, so it didn't totally undermine the current regulations also. So we could bring forward like a resolution stating why we were going to participate in this way, if that's the way council desires.
But what good are we really doing if it's only partial replacement?
No, with that funding, we would do full replacement. If we were to take on and utilize the SRF funding, we'd have to do full replacement of the identified lead or galvanized replacement lead service lines. So it'd be full replacement. Sorry if I didn't clarify that.
Maybe I misunderstood. Okay, thank you.
So if, as a city, we're going and replacing the private side of the, what the homeowner owns of the utility, what's the liability on the city if you're on private property, excavator, gardens,
Yep.
landscaping?
Yep.
What's
all
the
of it.
liability for breaking
You
stuff
assume
and-
responsibility through the construction process, just like any other construction project that would go on. We would obtain a temporary construction easement, and we would, and in that temporary construction easement, we would specify the conditions of that easement. And typically, what we do is we say we put it back the way it is. So if we have to go through a driveway, we'd have to
That's
replace the driveway entirely.
That's
That's a,
I get what you're saying about that. You put it back the way it is. That's in the eye of the beholder. You get what I'm saying.
I do get what you're saying, and I think we could approach it in some different ways if that's the direction of council. And I can go back and clarify, but the funding supports the replacement of the line. It doesn't support the replacement of all the amenities above the line. So maybe.
So if we're gonna have to go rip out somebody's driveway to get through it, or a deck to get through it. It does not replace the cost to put the new deck on.
I believe the funding would support that cost if we wanted it to.
that's a big unknown.
So. Yeah,
I mean, of course, as we manage the project, we're going to try to minimize those costs just as a part of
I know
managing
that-
the project. But I think you're right. I mean, there are certain things that we will not be able to get around because of the way the construction of the service line into the house.
So I know that, say for like the electrical utility, say Flat Electric, they own up to the transformer. Then after the transformer, that's the homeowner side. And if we were comparing, apples to apples on something like this, there's no way that Flat Electric would do anything on the homeowner side, the private side, to go through and, they'll pull the line, but it's yours. So if there was something that had to go through and be done, they're not doing it. So I'm kind of thinking out loud here. I'm throwing a lot of things around, but the whole thing about other things that, there's a 120-year-old tree we got to rip out or something, or we're cutting roots or whatever. There's a lot of things that.
Which brings up another point. How long would that liability last? You cut a root, tree dies the next year, they come, I understand what you're saying totally.
is there, if we do this for landowner, that part of the agreement of us paying the cost is some limited liability waiver of, for the city of, if we cut the roots of the tree and the tree falls over, the there's some protection for the city for liability that, there's inherent, risks in some of this, but
And obviously, we'd have a contractor involved in all this.
Yes, yeah,
This-
we would procure a contractor to come in and perform the
then-
work for us.
They would have some liability as
They
well.
do, yeah. We all have insurance and liabilities, and we write those into the contracts, and we do our best to protect the city as we do construction projects, although we don't typically go onto private property on a lot of our projects, so. I'd have to, go back and think about exactly what that language would need to be to protect the city, but we can definitely, put our heads together and put something together for that.
Susie, could those, if there was that opportunity of a line needing to be replaced and let's say there's a deck in the way or a big old tree or something, could that line be abandoned and left in the ground and have a new pipe put in?
I believe that could be an option, sure, yeah.
I mean, that would make more sense
As long as
than
it's
tearing a deck
disconnected and
off.
can't be utilized and they're using a new service line, then yeah.
It would still need to hook up to where it goes into the house, though.
It would need to hook up, but I'm just thinking, if it runs under a driveway,
Yeah.
you could probably go over a few feet and run it from the street
Oh, yeah.
and avoid the driveway. Because mine is one where if you want to get to my water pipe, you have to drill through the driveway. Brilliant contractor in my neighborhood.
So a couple things that we would look at, there are some trenchless technology, so we could look to pull lines where we would pull the lines through and not have to do as much surface excavation portions of it. So we would look at that. And then Joe just reminded me too that, if we're next to a great big tree and roots, then we could abandon that line at the main and tap, maybe 3 feet away and bring in a different line and a different route too. So we could look at those alternatives. Not to say we could do that for everyone, but we would definitely, utilize what we can to reduce the cost for everybody.
Yeah, I'm still having a little bit of a hard time with a lot of this. I mean, you can either use, even if we're taking that federal loan, it's still our money, right? Now, if you look at the big picture, Kalispell gets way more in loans and grants per capita than pretty much anywhere else in America because, we're so small. But the fact is that, I know that Congress does not have this in their budget because Congress doesn't have a budget. Right? And the CR that they're contemplating didn't have this in it. So, you got to kind of wonder where are the funds coming from. I do understand. I mean, it's pretty nice that they have that option there. I'm just worried about, we're basically taking everybody in Kalispell and helping out the few that have this lead line issue, right? When in history, it's been up to the homeowner to take care of that portion of the line. So, the whole thing, I really like that we have the option that if we don't go that way and we put it on the homeowner, then we can make it hurt less over time with the payment into the water bill. But I'm still really contemplating the ins and outs of everything. It really doesn't make a huge impact on our Kalispell water users because if we were to take on the loan, their rates aren't going to go up. But the reality is there's 1.4 whatever $1 million that we're spending over what we had planned to. So where was that money going to go anyways? So we're still losing the almost $1.5 million. I'm still thinking about it. I really like that they at least approached it with, at least they put some funding with their mandate, right? That's refreshing.
That's monopoly money.
But it's monopoly money, so.
But it was approved. The loan forgiveness amount is coming out of the infrastructure bill. Is that where it's coming from?
You know, I believe it is through the infrastructure bill, but I would have to go back and verify.
How did we handle the meter replacement program that we did a while back? How was
That's
that
through
paid?
rates.
That was through rates.
Yep,
That was system-wide.
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 I believe that.
But is
it
that-
increased rates like 20 cents or something like that?
Oh, yeah, I'd have to go back and
Yeah.
double check.
Yeah,
But
I remember that discussion.
That meter's on the private side?
the meter is within, yeah, it's either, well, if they're in the meter pits, then they're in the right of way now. But
Okay.
yeah, a lot of our meters are still in houses.
So it's a mix.
Yep, yep.
And that project is all done?
No, we're still in the works. It's gonna take us several more years to be able to go in and replace all of the meters. It was really over, a 5 to 7 year time span for us to get into, 10,000 different units and change them out. So we took on the project as an internal project, so we get it done as many as we can per year.
Remind me, Susie, was the 60% from Giant Fortune, or is that from the feds?
Say again?
The 60%, is that state? Or is that
No,
feds?
I believe that it is coming from the bill, like Councilman Hunter said.
Yeah,
So
okay,
I think
so-
it's coming from the
Infrastructure.
infrastructure bill being fed through the state, who has to then manage those funds as they
Got it.
come in.
So yes and yes.
It is. Giant Fortune does put its hands on.
I can get that specifically and get that to everybody. Where it's coming from.
I guess I think where I would be on this, and that's why I asked about the meter pit, because that was a government mandated change that we did as a city. So that went through, it was paid for, well, that was kind of a mixed bag because, huh?
Wasn't mandated.
That wasn't a
Wasn't
mandate, no.
No, it
Mm-mm.
was choice
No,
for
we just needed-
efficiency.
we
That was a
needed
choice
to,
for efficiency, we went to remote sensors and.
But didn't they eventually all have to go through and be switched out?
Well, because they were all failing. So meters only last a certain amount
Yeah.
of time. So we would have had to go in and replace them anyway. And the system that we were under was not the best system out there. We were having
Right, yeah.
multiple failures.
I
with
mean, it definitely made things better.
Yeah, yeah. So we went through the process. So that was more of an internal discussion and Kalispell Public Water Supply decision and council decision.
Your meter will last twice as long as you bypass it with a 1-inch.
But you are right, it was government mandated, it was just us.
Yeah, we are the mandate.
Well, that's what I'm saying though. So where I'm going with this is that it's not like somebody has a broken pipe in their property and then we're going through and digging it up and paying for it. This is coming down from the top as a mandate that it has to go through and be done. And so my dilemma where I'm at is I'm with,
Well, it's kind of a mandate, but then again, it's not like, well, you have 3 houses that didn't do it, so you're shutting down until they're done. You contacted them, they couldn't afford it, they couldn't do it, so you didn't do them. So there's a mandate, they want it done,
yeah.
but there's no repercussions for our system
Okay.
if you have some holdouts or you can't get them done.
But I do see it as there's a difference there in that the reason it's being done is because lead is harmful, particularly children, and so it's a public safety issue. Whereas like replacement of something, whether it's meters or the electrical line or something, there's you're doing it for efficiency purposes, but there's not like a safety component necessarily in there. And so that, to me, makes this more unique in that there's a pretty significant public safety issue that's at stake. So where a person may deny, the changeover because they can't afford it, well, we don't want people keeping lead in their system when they might have kids in the house because they can't afford it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's-
but the problem with that though is that you're only going to the house. So inside the house, you still have that. You would still have that. In that was kind of where the question was that I had before. What's the amount of length of pipe that it takes to go through and contaminate water supply? Is it 2 feet, or does it get more contaminated the longer the pipe is? or is it just one fitting, you know, that goes through and can go through and have an effect on the amounts of lead in the water system, for say for your house? Because if you go to the house and you replace everything, and inside the house there's somewhere in the house there's a piece of lead pipe and all the water's running through that pipe, is it contaminating the whole house?
It's definitely has the potential to bring in lead concentrations as the water passes over that lead surface.
Right.
It's obviously going to leach into the water source as it's coming through, whether it's in the house or the service line. So the longer length and the longer exposure you have, you know, the more exposure you're going to have within that house. If it's a short piece of pipe inside the house, you're going to have a short exposure, but you'll still have some exposure that comes through that one house, and whether it goes to the bathtub or it goes to the toilet. But you're right. The proportions and the exposure are going to be different depending on the length of the area that's exposed to the water as a lead service line. So.
Standard building construction, when did they stop with lead pipes?
Actually, if you recall from our previous work session, I believe in the 70s, the city of Kalispell actually adopted a resolution, I think, banning lead service lines. And then in 1988, the state of Montana did also. So we have a couple historic trigger points within Kalispell. It's in the 70s, and I think it's either 1985 or 88 that the state of Montana did it, but the city of Kalispell did it much earlier, actually.
Thank you. I did not remember that date.
77, I think.
77, I think.
Resolution 839, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I say in the 1970s. The city banned it in the 1970s, and then the state of Montana banned it in 88.
I have a question. It could be because I drank from lead pipes and had skim milk as a little kid, but can you go back to the screen that had the funding options?
Absolutely.
So what I'm hearing is if we went with where it goes on the customer's bill, but the customer comes up and ignores the 4 or lists, we don't have to do anything with it.
Well, we do. We have to approach that customer in, I believe it's either 3 or 4 different avenues.
Right.
To try to convince them to replace their lead service line or their galvanized required replacement service line. And we have to document that we tried to do that. And if they say no, and then we've checked that box for that service line until the property exchanges hands. So then
Correct.
we would have to start that process over as a part of that, so.
But our mains are all not lead. They're not lead. We're the only place where we have lead in our system is from the main to the house. So it would be on that house owner. We give them the 4 opportunities. We talk to them. They don't do anything. But we give them the option, you can place it on the bill.
Yep.
Understanding that if you don't replace it, then the next person that buys the house is probably going to have to replace it to buy the house.
We could do that, yeah. We could put in a lot of kind of conditions also
then
to
it
kind of help
places
set
that-
us up to implement the rules.
It still takes it to the house
Yep.
and the house owner making the determination if they want to go with that risk of the lead or not.
Yep.
And then we don't have to use the tax dollars that, because I agree with Sid, it's still money. It may mean, it's only almost 1.5 million, but it could mean we'd have to adjust our rates in the future at some point at a closer time because of it. It may not, by 2028, still looks good, but, so if I use that thought, then I kind of lean to, we put it on the onus of the homeowner and let them go with it, and when they sell the house, they know they're gonna have to do something.
And to further that a little bit, I remember the graph that showed how we were changing rates over time and how they were just going to
Right,
meet
right.
at some point. I don't know if that was 2028 or what year that was, but at some point, we're probably going to pop over and have to raise rates because of that. Depending on the length of the loan, is it a 20-year?
20-year loan, yeah.
20-year loan? Yeah, so unless we look out 20 years, and there's so many variables after the first 5 or whatever, it's kind of crazy. But anyway, I do recall that graph vividly when we were talking about water rates and how initially it was okay, and then the rate versus how much it costs is good, pops over at some point.
Would you expect the 1.4 million to have any kind of meaningful impact on when those rates pop over, as it were, of?
As I was doing the projection, I only did go through 2028, and at that time we were starting to dip a little bit below the 90-day operation, the O&M portion of it. So it does start to affect it, just because it was a different type of project that we didn't anticipate. But anytime we put something new in, you have to go through the process. It's just a big project that we didn't anticipate, so I didn't put those in the cost when we went through it last year. So we do start the minimum operation reserves at 90-day reserves. By 2028, we were right at that. So which means that maybe the next year we might have been over. But I only went through 2028, so.
Yeah, but I mean, in effect, it's really, if we're talking months of difference when you cross that threshold, potentially with this amount.
No, just
I get
go ahead.
that point, but I also think that it's that thing of 1,000 cuts, right? It's only 1.5 this time. Next time it's only 1.5. It's at what time does those 1.5s all come up to a bigger number? And I guess that's my thought. on
So
that.
even if we were to put the cost on the homeowner, we're still, as a city, looking at this lead service line replacement loan for us, right? Is that true? I mean, it's not, or is this just for the customer?
Just for the customer.
It really would be a project that supports full replacement of a lead service line for the customer, that the city would then, incur that cost.
Okay,
As a
so this has nothing to do with the lead lines that we were gonna replace up to the curb stop anyway.
Oh, and we
has-
would still do that practice. If we ran into a lead line, we would
Sure.
always replace it up to the,
Okay,
or if we have a leaking line, we would replace it to the curb stop.
all right.
So,
But that does not meet the obligations of what the rule is.
right, back to Sam's point about if we have somebody that is refusing to replace it, and that falls on the new owner, do we know if a bank is gonna loan money to somebody if they've had a mandate federally to replace lead pipes?
I was just gonna liken this to, many people know they have asbestos, they know they have lead-based paint, they could know they have this, and they can't afford it, or they think, I've dealt with it for years, I'm fine, I'm still living.
They glow, but
They could glow. That's not funny. Sorry, I laughed at you. But there's a certain homeowner responsibility that would show up in a home inspection, of which
Right.
then
Correct.
has to be dealt with from a lending institution and the homeowner at that time.
Right.
I'm guessing part of the inspection or part of the process is they come to the city and say, is there any outstanding debt on this house, or anything that you have noted about it? And you're gonna put it in your system so that if the ownership of that changes, now we know, okay, timer starts again, right?
Yep. So we'll put a note in the account if we have a new person on that account or a changeover of the account, then it kind of starts that over for us, that we have to start that process over.
I think we should get the lead out, as much lead out of the city system as we can, while we have a good this loan program is not gonna be around forever. I mean, it doesn't raise rates, it's a good program, it's very generous. Let's take advantage of it and get as much lead out of the system as we can now while we can. And, you talk about kind of 1,000 cuts on the city. I don't see it as very impactful, the fact that we don't even have to raise rates to be able to cover it. But You take a household who's struggling with their own budget and you add this, I mean, that's 1,000 cuts for them. Just another thing on top of water sewer rates that we did a few years ago and the, solid waste pickup rate increases that we're hitting them. And we have to, you have to raise rates to pay for stuff. But here's an opportunity where we don't have to hit them. And we have a very generous program to take care of it where we don't have to raise rates. I think we should go that route.
I understand that you don't have to raise rates now, but we only projected out 4 years, right? And by Susie's own admission here, it looks like after that 4 years, there's a possibility that we would have to raise rates to cover this.
Or before.
To cover we're there regardless of this, right? I mean, it makes very small difference, whether we're hitting that,
Well, essentially what you're looking at, and you can think of it, it's $1.4 million, which is a pretty, 4 blocks of water main. So it does take away a project that we potentially would have done, or we had, prioritized in a different mechanism. So it might take away some rehab and replacement projects, or if we needed to do a transmission main for new development. So it probably does take, you're prioritizing projects, you're taking away potentially a project that's already been prioritized and highlighted on the capital, and you're moving in the lead service line replacement project. So it does affect it in some way. There's only so much money that we can deal with, but it might push or kick the can down the road on a different project that we might have done sooner because we had the funding.
but one we don't have identified yet.
Or current ones we have. We have a lot of capital projects identified that we look at our budget and see what we can handle.
But isn't that what the collection of the water rate would be for then? I mean, obviously, for projects like that, replacement, rehab.
Yep, rehab, replacement, new development projects, and that's why we look at rates and the impact fee together.
So if
I think
we're,
something to highlight too, so when we're going through and we're putting the budget together, I calculated the 3.6 million kind of based off of what the information we had at the time. And then we split that 60-40 and we would incur debt on 1.4 million. But if you look down at our actual, where we're at right now and with those projections, so we know we have 32, of the lead service lines we need to replace that are street side. And if we applied the 13,000 to them, and then again, we have 96 that are house side and we apply the 17,000, that really gets us to 2.3 million. And we might not be quite as high as what I looked at the fund for also.
Isn't this?
And we're still fine tuning those numbers. So it might not be 96 house side replacements either, because we're going to go in and verify all those. But these are the best numbers I have right now to provide projections.
Can't this be negotiable? Can't we say we'll go 80-20 and 0.9% interest? I mean,
No, the SRF funding has specific conditions with it. So I originally actually was thinking, okay, we would facilitate the project and have the homeowner just pay the 40%, and get the rest paid for, and just have it done that way, and not bring that on to all the water, for the water fund, just have it done individually. But they will not let you do that. You have to have the water fund incur the entire debt. The responsibility has to be shared by the fund. It can't be put on an individual, and they did that purposefully.
See, Jed, we can make our great-great-grandkids pay.
I see this.
60%.
Right.
But again, with the federal program where we talked about I can't remember what Jed had mentioned, but it's not like if we don't take this program, that goes back to taxpayers. I mean, it's already allocated funds. Some other city gets it,
Is,
Monopoly money.
could the new rule affect the loan?
Not that I'm aware of. I believe the state of Montana has this money ready for this type of usage till probably next year, through next spring, and then I think it goes away and back, and I don't know if it goes back into the federal coffers or where it disappears to, but this funding is only there is a timeline on this funding. I don't know
Okay.
where it goes to if it doesn't get used.
So I guess the question that I have is, would you say that this is the kind of thing that we collect our water rates for?
It is not typically, as we calculate our expenditures, is not a typical item that we would spend money on. We do, I mean, we replace, if there is a leak on the service line from the main to the curb stop, we will go in and replace that part of it. If we're doing a dig and we're doing a main replacement and we recognize the service line is a lead service line, then we replace it from the main to the curb
If
stop.
there was a leak on the
On the house side,
house side,
we send them a letter and we have conditions for them to replace it in a timely manner.
And it's been that practice for how long?
For as long as I've worked at the city.
But again, I'd say the difference is that, in those cases, it's kind of current maintenance that they would be responsible for that, whereas lead, I mean, this stuff was put in decades ago. I mean, that, odds are the homeowner is not the person who had any responsibility for the situation.
I would say those are good odds, yes.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't know that for sure.
Whereas, some, their pipe gets plugged up because they've been pouring, oil down their drain for the last 10 years or something. Well, it's probably their fault, right? And so, kind of fixing that is on them, right?
I guess on the flip side though, is it everybody else's responsibility, even though it wasn't that person's responsibility?
When it doesn't raise rates at all, I see it as,
yeah, but it pulls money.
I
It
get
pulls
that.
money from the fund for things that it was collected for, albeit maybe smaller projects. I don't know if there's small, large, medium, projects, but it pulls money from the ability to go. And then if we do have an emergency where we have a project we have to do prior to 2028, we're going to be looking at an increase probably just for what, if we have a $2 million project bump in that we're going to have to do within that amount of time, we would have spent $1.5 million of the money that we would have had for that.
I think this is a unaddressed, long-standing emergency for the city, in my opinion. The effect on kids of lead exposure, and do we want a community where we have kids who have the effects of lead exposure? That kind of surpasses for me. That to me says emergency.
So having the lead in the system from the main to the house, if that's lead, does that contaminate back to the rest of the, sorry?
Contaminate back into the rest of the system. It's only going to contaminate that house.
Yes. Yeah. Unless there is some type of siphon that pulls, and, there's a backwater siphon that would pull water from the house to the main to somebody else's. And, we hope that never happens in our water systems.
Right. And I mean, we go into points of having air gaps in there so that we can't create siphons back out, right?
It's a pressurized water system, so pressure should always be flowing to the house. But in, a bad instance where we're flowing 4 fire hydrants at the same time and we're pulling on that main and we're in a low pressure
Okay.
area, there is always that potential to have a backwater siphon into the public water supply that could bring water from maybe that was in that service line to a different service line for a minimal amount of time, when we're.
And when it got siphoned back in, we'd be diluting it back into others. So we're back to the PFAS dilution.
Those are very hypothetical,
Right.
low percent scenarios that would happen.
Right, I guess that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, very, very low percentage that would ever happen. Yeah.
So, as you worked up your numbers projecting how many lines are out there, which is a guess, are you using dates or
Well-
dates of what are you basing those numbers on for your estimates?
We're not guessing. We are actually doing an official inventory of the system, and we've utilized multiple routes to make sure what our inventory data is accurate, and we're required to make sure it's accurate as a part of the inventory process. So we looked at maintenance histories, meter change out, construction drawings. We have what we call tap cards. So the City of Kalispell water operators, since the conception of the water system, we kept really good records. So we have tap cards that actually tell us what the service lines are. So we're going through those tap cards, and that is a validation. So we can count that as a validation. And when we're doing meter change out, we're having the water meter technicians identify what the service line coming into the houses. So no, we are technically inventorying each service line per the rules required. Not a guess.
I knew you weren't guessing. I just wanted to hear it.
Some were years too, like you're alluding to. If the area was developed after 1977 or 1988, then we knew that they weren't going to contain lead service lines, and so years were a factor in that approach as well.
Gotcha.
Yep. And that is a validated process that we can utilize. Yep.
What's my house?
Old.
Did you go
Copper.
do this? It's copper.
I think it's copper. Some of it was institutional knowledge.
Did you do the survey? Did you go down and look? Great discussion. Ultimately, I am going to need some direction on which way council would like to fund the service line replacements.
Either way, we need to vote on it.
I know,
It's an
Okay.
action item,
It's an action item. Okay.
but
yeah.
either we vote for the resolution or we don't, because I'm struggling to figure what's in your resolution.
Yeah, whatever, if we are gonna go with the SRF loan, we have to have like a really, good resolution that covers exactly what we're doing. This is a one-off. This isn't something that's gonna be, continuing forward.
There's never a one-off, Sid.
So
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can take that and run with it. I can bring back a resolution and we can bring it before council during a regular meeting, and then we can have good discussion again, and then leave it up to council to vote.
will the resolution then be that SRF loan or provide two options and we
Yeah.
have two resolutions and somebody picks it up and
Well,
does one?
I would not necessarily need a resolution to support if the city water customer funding it individually, because that's currently what our regulations state. So I don't need a resolution to move forward with that
That's sure.
process. I would need a resolution that the city water funds would support the costs for individual service line replacements. So
Okay.
I
So if
only
you-
really need one resolution.
And if you brought that one resolution up, and for whatever reason, whether it failed or not, it would just automatically then go back to the customer.
Customer would be responsible
Okay.
for the replacement of the service lines.
Got it.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I've still got a car that burns lead. Will you buy me a new Toyota?
And my first two cars burned lead.
Okay, well, that is all I have for this evening. I guess I'd turn it back over to you,
Okay.
Your Honor.
Anything from council? Oh, is there any public comment? Didn't think about that. Okay, anything from council? Okay,
I,
I've got nothing.